Hello everyone, I'm Michael, and today, I'm going to tell you a story. Redditors with an ex who threatened to kill themselves over a breakup. How did that turn out? Story 1 was with a girl once, and we were on the rocks for a while. Break up then get back together, and it got quite toxic. So one day, I decided that was it and called it quits. I used to work retail, and she knew my shifts, and she popped up to my work to buy essential even though my workplace was 20 minutes further from her closet shops. I served her politely, then kept it civil, which for her was a shock as I would usually give in and we would confess our love and get back together. So, once that happened, she left the store and back, then we weren't allowed mobile phone on shift, so she blew up my phone, messages and calls and saying stuff like how I embarrassed her, etc. I got off the shift and looked at my phone and ignored her messages, and a couple of hours later, when I was home, finally decided to pick up one of her calls to tell her to leave me alone. She told me she was in hospital and she attempted to take her life. I was shocked and asked which hospital and if I could come. She said no. I kept pressing for details and she would avoid and tried to getting back together. I was like 90% sure she was faking it. I told her I would be there for her as a friend, but I won't be getting back with her for the sake of my health and sanity. I hung up on her and called her friends and told them what had happened. They were shocked and started calling her, etc. The next day, I got confirmation that she had faked it all, and that was the moment I knew I made the right choice. Story 2. Back in the 90s. Broke up with her for a lot of reasons. She had lied to me about a lot of things. Manipulated, got cut, crossed lines. I told her not to cross, so I told her we were over. I was 18. She was 23. She threatened to kill herself. Neighbor found her in her garage sitting in a car that was running. Got a call, got there as the ambulance was pulling up. Went to the hospital, she was going to be fine. Her family treated me like I was the one at fault. I told her goodbye, told her she needed to get help, and left. Never saw her again. Got a letter like 6 months later, but I just threw it away. This was about 6 months after my dad had killed himself because he found out he had terminal colon cancer. Got drunk, he was an alcoholic, gambling addict, ruined his life, and shot himself using the pistol my mom bought him for Christmas a few years earlier. He was a cop. So I had no tolerance for this sort of emotional manipulation. She had her family, and I knew they would take care of her. Story 3. After he backed me into a corner with a big knife and threatened to stab himself to make me happy, then why was I the one in the corner? My dude. I videoed the rest of his destructive meltdown, punching walls, throwing dishes across the house, screaming threats at me, and sent it to my mom. Then I told him she had it, and he was going to let me leave and sign the divorce papers, or she would send it to his chain of command and get him dishonorably discharged. Now that I know more about domestic violence, I do not recommend that direct kind of confrontation. I was very lucky it worked. Story 4. My ex-wife did this. When we were dating and she was cheating with several people and I found out, I broke up with her. I got tired of the fake apologies and no change in behavior. Then my bass player called saying she showed up at his house bleeding from slitting her wrists. I showed up, felt sorry for her, picked her up and brought her home. We had to do a homemade rehab and she sobered up and we had 2 kids. She still cheated while I was at work. It was less than a year after our second baby was born that she kept cheating. I reached my breaking point and divorced her. We co-parent now, and it is frustrating because she continues to be verbally abusive and constantly threatening me with legal action of taking the kids away from me whenever I get on her case for neglecting the kids or her new husband being abusive towards our kids. I'm the better parent, have had to call CPS on the stepdad, and have had the kids 75% of the time since the divorce. CPS and the police don't do anything because she can compose herself and behave for a short period of time and appear non-threatening. She used to be a fashion model, and when people talk to her, they are immediately enchanted by her beauty and are more distracted by her face than the nonsense that comes out of her mouth. My relationship with her was a constant unstable roller coaster, and I have no idea why we stayed together for so long, let alone why I agreed to having kids with her. I love my kids and have been to a lot of therapy, parenting classes, communication classes, trying every way possible to learn how to communicate more effectively with her. Nothing works. She has no respect for me and speaks to me like I'm a piece of shit. She was in the foster care system for a while, and was adopted by some religious freaks. Lots of substance abuse problems in her life. I mistakenly thought that all she needed was someone who cared for her and loved her unconditionally. Nope. I can't wait for my youngest to turn 18 so that I can leave the city and not have to see their mom every week at drop-off. When you talk to professionals as a man about being abused by a woman, they don't take you seriously. The support groups for domestic violence treat you, the man, as an outsider and are not supportive. My life is peaceful now and I'm healing and recovering from a million other issues. My marriage to my ex and her present issues, I'm still attempting to overcome. Story 5. I stayed somewhat firm but didn't kick her out immediately. After she realized it wasn't going to change my mind, she threatened again, and after a lot of things, having to hold her back, take all potentially dangerous objects away from her, break into my own bathroom to get the razors away from her, etc., etc. She eventually ran to the balcony and pretended to choke herself unconscious. Thankfully, my roommate picked up on this and how distraught and completely unable to process the situation I was at the time, and pulled me aside, said she was okay, then told me to leave the apartment to go outside and call 911 for her. They showed up, immediately recognized she was taking and started barking orders at her, took her and had her admitted with affidavits signed by my roommate and myself. She came back to the apartment after and only a few hours in, deciding to keep trying to make things happen with me. I had to continue to tell her no, and tell her parents to come get her so I wouldn't be forced to get law enforcement involved. They finally understood. A week or two before this I gave the same ultimatum, and they told me to call the cops. I was pretty guilt-ridden about the whole thing. I hate seeing people hurting. She finally got picked up and left. I ignored all her calls and texts, and then one day she managed to call me from some other phone, roughly a month or two after all this. She asked me how we're going to get through all this and the distance as a couple. I had to reiterate again we weren't together. Very clearly. For about a half hour. Like 6 years later, she reached out to me and apologized and wanted to say she's sorry for everything and that she's finally received appropriate help and all that jazz. I forgave her, but haven't really talked to her at all since. She seems to be happily engaged to some other dude in another city now, and Jay wish nothing but the best for her. Story 6. I had an ex that was schizophrenic who threatened suicide if I ever left her. When I left her, I did so by phone when she was staying down at her parents' house. While I hated to do it that way, that felt like the only way. I could guarantee she wouldn't do anything. They'd watch her too close. Seems to have worked, last I heard. She was happily married and had moved to California. However, there's a bit more to the story. That night, each of her parents called and left me an angry message. Her mom was understandably upset and tried to guilt me about it. Her dad, on the other hand, left me drunken death threats, saying things like you're a marked man and count your lucky stars. I haven't caught up to you yet. I took out a permanent restraining order after that. Related side note, did you know permanent restraining orders aren't actually permanent and can be overturned without the party who got the row knowing about it? Another story for another time, I suppose. Story 7. He tried to kill me instead and is now sitting in prison. Long story short, he had gotten into drugs really bad, and when I finally had enough and told him it was over, he told me he would annul himself if I left. It took me a week after that to actually leave because every day he would tell me in a different way. I would hear things like, I love you too much to want you to be the one finding me. Or, I don't want you to have to see me do it because I love you. I would sit there and listen to him knowing I had to leave, that this scenario would play out the rest of my life if I didn't. One Friday, I left for work with nothing but the clothes on my back and my wallet. Still have the sweatshirt I was wearing that day. 2 weeks later, he came to my work and stabbed me. If it wasn't for a coworker, I'd be dead. I shared this story on another post with the lead up to this moment, so you can probably find that in my comment history. Story 8. I was 18 and in an emotional, verbal, mentally abusive relationship. My ex would threaten suicide. We all knew he was only saying that to manipulate me. Every time I wanted to leave or didn't do what he wanted, I had enough one day and told him to go ahead to do it. He was obviously shocked cause I hung up and blocked him. His mom ended up calling me begging me to unblock him because he will do something bad. I told her it wasn't my problem and hung up and blocked her too. He ended up stalking me, so I filed a restraining order against him. He always thought he had full control over me, so he was definitely shocked when I cut him out the way I did. Story 9. My ex was pretty unstable. When it was clear that our relationship was dying, she kept threatening suicide if I left her. The night I broke up with her, she grabbed my car keys and tried to run out the door, saying that she was going to drive my car off this big bridge down the road. I bear hug restrained her until I could grab the keys out of her hand. Once I let her go, she started hitting me and threw a glass lamp at my head. She just would not stop attacking me to get to my car keys. It devolved into me pinning her to the floor and just sort of laying on top of her while she punched, bit, and scratched me. I called 911. By the time the police arrived, she'd tired herself out and we were both covered in my blood. I was pretty sure I was about to be arrested for domestic violence, but thankfully she was stupid or unstable enough to tell them the truth, plus it helped that I was the only one with any injuries. I explained her suicide threats. They took her to the psych ward for 72 hours, and I spent the rest of the night cleaning blood out of the carpet. I packed my shit and disappeared by the time she got out. It was her name on the lease, so I just crashed with some friends until I could get my own place. The last time we spoke, she was mad at me for getting her sent to the hospital. In her words, I should have known she wasn't actually going to do it. Glad she could at least admit that it was all to manipulate me. Last I heard, she's still alive and crazy many years later. Story 10. My ex smashed all the Christmas presents I had for him tucked away in the closet and threatened to run out into the highway by our apartment complex and took off. He came back 20 minutes later mad that I didn't chase him. Then he was mad he didn't have any Christmas presents. I was kinda stuck there with him, and the next morning he threw my cat at me saying I loved her more than I loved him. This was very true. I immediately called his brother, who drove from out of state, picked him up, and hauled him away. We worked out stuff like giving his furniture back later on with lots of friends present. I was 18 and it was my first real boyfriend and the last time I put up with a guy that unhinged. Story 11. My daughter dated a guy at the first part of this year. She didn't love him, but he was very much in love with her. They broke up and stayed friends. He would still come by her work and talk to her and spend a lot of time there, and she was nice and friendly to him, didn't rub it in his face. When she started dating other people a month after they'd broken up, basically pretty good friends. One day, about a week before she graduated high school, he told her again that he loved her and was going to kill himself if she wouldn't be with him. She, and I'm proud of how she handled it like an adult despite being 18, told him that she cared for him and she'd always be there for him, but she didn't want a relationship with him more than friends. She wasn't dating anyone else at the time, and she had to explain that just because she wasn't with anyone else, that doesn't mean she's needing a relationship so bad that she'll date him just to keep from being alone. She explained that would be leading him on, and she'd never want to do that. Well, he went home and killed himself. He left a note saying it's because she wouldn't be with him, and he didn't want to live without her. Super small town in the rural South, so all of his friends and family blamed her. Detectives showed up at her school during exams and pulled her out to talk to her. She showed them all of their correspondence. They also said she'd been very adult and handled it in the best way she could have to be nice to the guy. One night, right after the graduation, we went to the local McDonald's. He had some friends that worked there and they kept giving her the stink eye, and she eventually went up to them and explained that she can't give her life for his, and that she shouldn't be expected to be unhappy for anyone, and she showed them exactly what she'd texted and how she wasn't trying to hurt him, and after that they were all cool. It's really taken a toll on her. She still feels horrible about it, and his mom still kind of makes offhand comments like, it's her fault. She's handled it as good as I could have hoped anyone would have, but nobody should have to go through that, especially at her age. And that poor boy, thinking the only way out was to die over not being in a relationship with her. Sad all around. Story 12. I was married to a man who was bipolar, and he had really bad lows. He would threaten to kill himself when we fought, when he was mad, when things didn't go his way. He would leave, but he usually drove around all night and came back home. I would make him a nice dinner, apologize, rub his back, etc. On the last time he decided to leave, it was different. I thought it was the same at first. We have kids, and usually, he did not help much with them. I worked nights and out the kiddos to bed before I would leave for work. He asked to put them to the bed, He prayed with them. That man had never prayed with the kids. I went to work and felt sick to my stomach thinking about what I heard. I ended up leaving work early because him praying kept playing on repeat in my head. All of these other random things started popping up, like the fact that he did not play his video games in over a week. I had asked him that evening why he hadn't been playing, and his response was that there was no point. He had just got me to start playing a game with him and his cousins, but then just stopped. He also was not eating much that week or sleeping well. He went to bed with me twice that week but wouldn't look at me, and both nights, he was holding his chest like he was in pain. He said he had heartburn. I offered to get him meds, and he declined both nights and went to the couch. He left early both of those days without saying goodbye. I didn't think much into it because I knew he was busy at work. He had been staying very late. All of this stuff was mulling over in my head. I rushed home and asked if he was okay. He told me he was leaving. I thought he meant divorce. I asked him not to go, and I begged him to stay and sleep. He said he couldn't. I remember him walking out to the car. He looked strange. He wasn't wearing his boots. He wasn't wearing his watch. It was weird. I wanted to ask, but he told me not to stop him. I watched him leave, and I somehow knew I would never see him again. I felt it. I tried calling him, but he blocked my number. I found out later that he had called his mom, and she had defended me. He asked to stay with her, and she told him no. I tried calling him again in the morning, and he finally called me back. He told me to stop trying to call or he would kill himself. I had heard him say this so many times before. This time, I told him, no, you won't. I will have your favorite dinner on the table and be here when you come back. I love you. His response, I'm done. Go home to your family, figure out the kids. I told him. I loved him again. He sounded so sad, and he said goodbye. I went to the store to keep things normal for the kids. His mom told me not to call the police, that it would just make him mad. So I bought the ingredients for his favorite dinner, and then it hit me. As I picked up an item off the shelf, I felt that I could not breathe. I felt like I was choking. My vision was blurry. I felt this for about a minute. When it passed, I tried calling him. I raced home and jumped on our laptop. I checked our Google history. We have one joint email for bills with our personal emails attached to this account. I searched the history, and the last thing that he searched was how to tie a noose. He was gone. The police found his car the next day and found him a few hours later. They also questioned me and his girlfriend. I didn't know about the girlfriend. I wish I had left him years before. Every time I wanted to, he would say that. I stayed because everyone told me that he had never been so happy before, that I had saved his life 10 years before that. I did not realize that this was not normal. Oh, ended up spending 10 years pleasing a man, being miserable and always worried about him. It kills me still. I wish I could have saved him again. He made it impossible this time. He had the whole thing planned out. He even called everyone and said goodbye. Story 13. We were 17 and 18. I considered a breakup when I realized that he had an ugly habit of threatening to harm himself if I potentially did something he didn't like, and that it would obviously, be my fault. But this quote of his is what made me turbo emergency exit instead of break up amicably. When you and I have a family with kids, and I ever get the feeling you might be cheating on me, I'll shoot the kids first, in front of you, so you will witness that, then I'll shoot you, and then myself. This was said within a lighthearted what might our future together look like, way down the line, type of conversation. Story 14. I was 19. I was trying to end things. He had become controlling. I found his escalating behavior embarrassing and uncomfortable. I had never been exposed to domestic violence, so I didn't know what to do, and it was really just gross feeling initially. There was an evening things blew up. He called my mom and told her I was drink driving. I was sober, in an attempt to control me, and there was a lot of verbal abuse in public at his work function. I ended up having to lock myself in the bathroom at his parents'. They were away. I was trying to get myself help, but he told me he'd shoot me through the door with his dad's gun if I didn't come out. Then he'd shoot himself. Things seemingly had just flipped, less of a shock in hindsight. He was very serious. So I pretended everything was fine and I was wrong and silly, and we slept with the gun right there. A week later, I broke up with him over text while he was on a road trip with his parents. His mom told my mom he threw himself out of the moving car. He's still alive. And I quote, I don't blame Finney for not wanting him. His mother was abusive in all the ways. My family are usually the ones to tell me about what they've heard, and it usually involved illicit drug abuse and other issues. It's pretty sad to think about. He could have and should have been so beautiful. Story 15. Little bit of a backwards story. My ex was very manipulative. She faked a pregnancy. One night she called me and said she was going to kill herself by the train. I was still dealing with depression at the time from another event that transpired between us. I am a hopeless romantic and thought that if she was doing that, then I wanted to go with her. I downed 2 bottles of Tylenol. Problem was she never actually tried to commit suicide. Yup. Live and learn, I guess. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder a few months before this and have had up and downs for 20 years. Even though I'm an extremely sentimental man, after that happened, I became very guarded. Story 16. She called me panicking cause her ex was threatening. I asked his address and called an ambulance. He got angry at her cause he was just playing video games and it was just a joke, with the kicker of to make her feel bad for leaving a good guy like him. She called me confused and upset he was taking it out on her. I told her what I did and pointed out that if it ever were serious, in all honesty, what was she gonna do about? Professionals would be better at handling it. Told her she should block him. He seemed to get the message, and he's a major freaking creep now. Story 17. He threatened it. I called the cops. They did nothing. It escalated to physical abuse. Cops got involved, and it turned into a 3-year court battle, ending with me on the witness stand getting cross-examined by his slimy lawyer and him getting acquitted. Years later, he expunged his assault record and is now in medical school. Was able to get accepted with no one knowing he has 3 domestic assault charges against him.